Good morning, good afternoon, good evening to all of you who are watching us here live today. This is Soul Empowerment. My name is David McLeod. I am your Life Mastery Coach, and we do these episodes once a month on the second Tuesday of every month. And today's topic is called Treasure in the Shadows. And well, I won't say too much about what that's about right now because we're going to get into it in a moment. But Nancy, why don't you go ahead and introduce yourself?
Oh, well, thank you so much. I'm Nancy Stevens, co-hosting together with my lovely co-host, David. When I'm not co-hosting the show, I enjoy working in the realm of well-being and lifestyle as a health and wellness coach. I'm a writer, been a featured author, as you have too, in the Wellness Universe, incredible self-care books. I enjoy blogging. I enjoy teaching a lot of mind-body classes, and this show is a perfect place for David and I to be and to really share all of the nuggets and wisdom that we've learned by having done it, and to just forecast and showcase and give that back to you.
Right. Yeah. Yes. The idea of soul empowerment. One of the things that I have learned in my journey of personal growth is my ego has been a challenge for me. And what I discovered in the course of doing a lot of personal growth work was that in order to quiet my ego, one of the things I needed to do was to uplift and empower my soul. And so that's really what this whole series of episodes is all about. Every episode we do, we talk about some aspect of soul empowerment. And already, I think this is episode number 15, if I'm not mistaken. And so we have been doing a lot of episodes on various different topics. And today we decided to talk about the shadow. Now, interestingly, as I have learned, the shadow and the ego are very, very tightly coupled. In fact, what happens is, just so we can understand the basic terminology here, when we refer to the shadow, we're referring to the Jungian version of shadow, which is the parts of ourselves, the aspects, the qualities, the characteristics that we tend to hide, disavow, disown, or repress because we believe that they are bad or wrong or inappropriate or whatever. We have that belief. And when we push them aside like that, what happens is we're really trying to take a belief system that we have and put it into the background. It becomes like a subconscious or unconscious belief system. The problem is it's still an active belief system, even though we're not conscious of it, and it still has energy within us. And so even though I might deny that I believe a certain thing publicly, I might say that publicly, deep down inside, I may still believe it. And usually the beliefs that we're talking about are things like, well, the most difficult one in my case, for example, is I'm not good enough. That's the deep, dark, unconscious belief that I hold that seems to generate energy for the shadow to start acting out. And that's really what we're going to be talking about today. There's a lot to cover here today, but I just wanted to get us a little bit of a, if you like, a foundation to start the conversation.
Yes. Wow. That's a lot. I know as we began to come together to prepare for our show, I think we started with finding authenticity, finding your voice. And then, well, how can you find your voice and really live authentically if you are unknowingly and knowingly connected to the shadow part? What comes to mind for me is something that I'm constantly working, evolving, and growing with is the shadow part of maybe I don't feel heard. I'm voiceless. So how that will come out sideways if and when things go that way is in anger. So you may have a belief or a thought that's back in the very background that you don't want anyone to know about, maybe not even yourself. I don't have a voice. And how that comes out is in these behaviors of frustration, anger, profound, maybe anxiousness or depression or sadness. And really at the heart of that is pausing to lovingly do the work underneath rather than accepting it its face value. So
Right. Yep.
working our way down into, and that's pretty much a big start and part of treasure in the shadows.
Well, you brought up a really good point there. This idea of, if I don't have a voice, if I am not heard, if I'm not important enough for other people to listen to me, then my shadow might come out and sideways try to keep you from being heard, to keep you quiet, to make your light dim. And I will, in my ego-based shadow behaviors, may look for ways to sabotage things for you, to make it harder for you. I might gossip about you behind your back or whatever. All these sorts of things, those kinds of behaviors that I guarantee you every human being on the planet has engaged in at one time or another, because we are all part of this whole strange web. We've all done it, and we've all been on the receiving end of it. So we have both engaged our shadow behaviors to do things that may have been harmful to other people, and we've also experienced other people's shadow behavior directed towards us. And it's painful when it happens. You can really feel it, especially when someone says something untrue about you that is meant to hurt you. And it's really, it's coming out of some kind of weird unconscious pain that they're doing. But until you've done the work for yourself to understand this, it's very difficult to remain compassionate with those people. And so consequently, we end up in these ego battles that turn into, well, if you have more than two people involved, then it can turn into, a family squabble. It can turn into a community squabble. It can eventually turn into a war. That's how bad this can get when shadow is not addressed and the ego is not understood. So that's what we're talking about here today. And
how to compassionately connect, because we had brought that up, with the other aspect of shadow, because we have such a stigma. Perhaps we don't even, before I even knew about shadow, I felt like I was always trying to get out from under or cover up or push aside those things that bubbled up unexpectedly, or that I just accepted that that's what it was. So we came to see those aspects of us as, ooh, I don't like that. That's uncomfortable. People don't want to see me engage in that. I don't like that. So we brought a really negativity bias towards shadow. But how about if we come alongside our shadow and use it as a signaling system? It's trying to get our attention in a way that we can begin to move in a relationship and pull out the nuggets that are there for us to learn from, to grow, and to heal from. So that's a big part of the work of moving from the discomfort or negativity bias of it into bringing it along as a means for me to find my authentic self, to really lean into and be comfortable in all aspects of me.
Right. Absolutely. And yes, I think that what we're talking about here is eventually getting comfortable enough with the truth of who you really are that you can, I like the way you said that, come up alongside the shadow and befriend it in a way and find a way to integrate it back in. Well, I think part of the problem is many people are afraid to look at those dark parts of themselves because of the fact that they kind of think, or many people believe, I've managed to contain this over here and it's out of the way, it's in the dark, nobody sees it. That's what they believe. In reality, people see your shadow all the time. That's just part of the nature of being human. I mean, you can see my shadow even if I naively believe that I've got it well hidden. You can see it. And it's always going to come out one way or another. So we can pretend that we've got it hidden away. And we also have this associated belief with that. As long as it's hidden away, it can't do any damage.
Yeah.
And what we're afraid of is if we open up that little container where we've this box or whatever where we've put all these shadow parts, then we let them out, we'll never ever contain them again. And that is a fear that most people have. And this is part of the reason I think that people avoid doing this kind of work, because they're afraid that if they open up Pandora's box, they'll never get exposed again. And I have to admit, when I started doing my own shadow work, I had some of that similar fear. And I did it in the context of group coaching, or men's work with a bunch of other men. And we had facilitators who were very skilled at helping us to look at these parts of ourselves. And they were able to help us see the parts in what we called a ritual safe space, so that there was no actual real world danger by bringing these shadows out. And in the process of doing that, as I witnessed other men opening up and revealing their shadows, I did not feel afraid of them or angry with them or upset with them. Instead, I felt, oh my God, that's just like me. And I thought, if he can do it, then I can do it. And so all it takes is one person in a group to have a little bit of courage with a sufficient help of a properly skilled facilitator. And then you can just let out a little bit at a time and start to learn about your own shadow and discover that they're not nearly as bad as you thought they were. And that's the beauty of doing deep shadow work. But you talked about something else there, Nancy, and I just want to bring attention to this. So let's, just imagine this is a rock, all right? And I shine a light on that rock. Okay. Well, there's a big shadow cast out behind it. So if that rock is casting a shadow, it's blocking out certain things and preventing those things from being seen. Well, not all the things that it's hiding are bad.
Exactly.
And so consequently, we end up, when we try to hide away those parts of ourselves that we believe are bad, sometimes we cast aside some really beautiful parts as well. So for example, you may have a beautiful singing voice, let's say. And somewhere along the way, maybe somebody got irritated with your singing. And consequently, you were told to stop making that noise, or who knows what kind of. And you then took on the belief that you had a lousy singing voice.
Exactly.
So you see, what happens is you take this belief and you try to hide that thing because somebody else got upset, and it really had nothing to do with you at all. And they may not even have disliked your voice. They were just upset about something else, and your voice just happened to irritate them in that moment. But you see, that's what happens. When we're kids, we just take everything personally.
No, you take on other people's energy and think that's your own, begin to form opinions. So the shadow work can start before you're born. It can start coming into the world as a baby. You can taking on as a child your caregiver or your parents' energy. And then it begins to be such a good friend that you unknowingly take all of these shadows that were either other people's stuff or your own limiting beliefs and perceptions, and carry that heavy suitcase of gunk with you, thinking that it is in fact not good. So you keep it contained, not wanting the light to shed. But really, when you have an opportunity to take a look inside of all of that murky darkness, that's where the treasure is found. Like being given permission to unpack and look at the shadows. For instance, I don't want people to see that I'm really angry. That's not a good attribute. Nobody wants to be around somebody that's going to be quick to, judge or be defensive. That's just, nobody wants that. But maybe going and looking at the shadow of anger, then you discover, I have an old wound that if I lovingly release it and let it go, that's going to dissipate the limiting beliefs behind it, and it's going to soften and release the anger. So that's where I think that's what we're talking about. There's really treasured richness in what you might have thought was a really big, hairy shadow or limiting belief, that there's treasure in there that's yours and others. And
well, and sometimes there's a lot of energy tied up in some of the words that we use to describe certain shadows. Let's say one of my favorite ones that I like to talk about is arrogance. Arrogance is seen as a bad thing for most people. Arrogance is, nobody ever wants to be classified as arrogant, but nobody minds being recognized as an expert in their field or somebody who knows a lot about something, So you see, arrogance and being an expert are, I hate to tell you this, but they're the same basic energy. The difference is that in arrogance, you tend to downplay somebody else's knowledge while elevating your own. Whereas if you're just simply an expert, you can listen to what other people have to say, even if they don't know what they're talking about. That's the difference between arrogance and expertise. And so when you understand that arrogance can be a kind of a shadowy form of just simple knowledge, of simple wisdom, it's a shadowy form of that, then you can begin to recognize, wow, there might be some actual gift in this arrogance, that if I learn to heal the wound that makes me want to seem smarter than I really am, heal that wound, and then I integrate that shadow part back into myself, then I can embrace the wisdom that is part of my natural being without being arrogant. That's the beauty of this whole process. Does everybody understand what I'm talking about?
Yeah.
If you don't, please ask questions.
Yes. And another thing that comes to mind also is, as we live externally in the world, you and I right now, or others, we are taught today to embrace and focus on positivity, happiness. So we're outwardly being told that it's a great thing. And it, of course, it is to seek the positive, the learning, the happiness. But as we do that, our shadows, we're denying or suppressing the other parts in us that are always going to be there. So where am I going with that? So as we constantly look to uphold and embrace being happy, being positive, being present, there are other emotions underneath that ground us to ourselves. There are plenty of times, especially during the pandemic, that we were uncertain. We didn't know that. To me, that was not a positive, happy emotion, but it was one I was able to handle and work with and integrate it into how I presented myself. So not denying the whole gamut of emotions, but integrating those. So it's an ability, I think, to balance. When we find and work with our shadow, we're asking to find that wholeness, that authenticity, that balance of not just having everything supposedly be up, 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 or down, 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 but looking at the rich context of that.
Yeah, that's a really good point. I think you're quite right. The people in the world seem to want everybody to be happy, and I think that's a great desire to have. And it would be nice. I mean, it's one of those things. I mean, think about beauty pageants. What's one of the things they all talk about? I want world peace. That's like the panacea. World peace, world harmony, happiness. That's what everybody wants. But the reality is, the universe is quite neutral. The universe is neither joyous nor angry. It's just kind of neutral. It's a neutral place for us to be and to experience all it is. And I think one of the best ways of experiencing and being happy is for me to know, express, and experience all of who I am, because that is the source of happiness.
Exactly.
So, and if I, as you say, if I have some negative emotion, well, what's a negative emotion? A negative emotion is any emotion that somebody else doesn't like. That's really all it is. And normally we associate things like, fear and sadness and anger in that list. They're supposedly negative emotions, but I don't see them as negative at all. I think they're just forms of energy that are meant to provide a kind of an information flow for us, telling us something about our surroundings, about what's going on. So if I'm feeling fear, maybe there's actually something scary for me to look at. If I'm feeling sadness, maybe it's because I am experiencing some kind of loss, and I need to allow myself, give myself permission to simply feel that. And if I'm feeling anger, well, this is not a justification for going out and doing violence or anything. But again, the anger is telling me something about maybe a boundary violation, or somebody's trying to keep me from fulfilling my goals or something like that. Maybe not somebody, maybe something, I don't know. And in that case, it's a signal to myself, hey, something's not quite right here. And I think I owe it to myself to pay attention to those feelings. And even when I'm not in that state of joyful contentment, or serenity.
I hear you on that one. And yeah, the word that comes up again, as I brought up again with us, is that we can use the shadows that bubble up, because they always will, as a signaling system, as a means that is wanting to get our attention in order to help us highlight or showcase those aspects of us that we might have initially been unaware of or aware of, but really uncomfortable with. Wow, if I don't want to pay attention to that, that's going to bring up a whole lot of uncomfortable feelings. I'm going to be really down. It's going to pull me down. I'm going to just put the lid on that. But again, what if, when we were signaled by our shadow to step inside and look at it, we were able to unpack it and bring out, quote, that raw, real feeling, emotion, energy, and really see it for what it is. Nothing more than a means to move us forward. And the shadow work, one of the big riches, I think, of doing shadow work is as we step into and own our shadows, the treasures and all of that, then we're that much more able to really fulfill and do our work here on earth. We can only give and do as much as we're able to, as you and I've said so many times, that we're able to step into our own internal space and work on ourselves. And that's the big step. Is I kind of like at the Grand Canyon. I'm having fun with this. So let's say you're at the Grand Canyon, you're at the top of the Grand Canyon. If you've never been there, it's just a beautiful, beautiful, very spiritual place, but you're looking down at the down at the bottom, and you can't even see it. Imagine you and your shadows initially are at the top, the surface level of the Grand Canyon. You're carrying all that. But as you walk down the Grand Canyon, take a little hike, or go down by mule, you're able to clear up and move through these shadows until you arrive owning all of yourself.
That's a beautiful metaphor. I like that. That's yeah, I haven't thought of it that way. That's quite interesting. Sometimes I talk about shadow work as cave spelunking.
Yeah.
Because and so it's interesting that you chose a landscape kind of metaphor as well. But that's really what it is. Yeah. You are, in a sense, going into the dark, but you have the luxury of bringing a flashlight. Okay, so you don't have to go into the dark completely dark. Yeah. You can bring a flashlight and you can shine a light on things. But obviously, when you're in a cave, you can't see the whole cave with one little flashlight. You can only see little parts of it, whatever you're shining on. And so what you do is you focus a little bit on each part, learn what that part is all about, understand its connection to the whole. And that's essentially what it is. Although, when you do real shadow work, there's obviously some emotion and some sensation and other stuff that comes up, and story as well, because every shadow that you have is probably associated with some kind of story related to something that happened to you when you were a child. It's almost always something to do about childhood. And for most people, it's in the neighborhood of anywhere from 3 to 7 years old. That's when most of these belief systems seem to come into play, the belief systems that we start pushing pieces aside. And by the time we're 7 or 8 or 9 years old, most of our beliefs are already well formed. And we carry those through the rest of our lives. And the thing is, when we're young, when we're 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 years old, we are immature in the sense that we don't know enough about proper strategies for coping with some of the problems that we're dealing with. And so we, if mommy says, be quiet, well, our natural response is to try and always be quiet, right? To try and please mommy. And in the same vein, when we get older and older, that story is still running in our heads. It's a tape loop, if you like. It's running in our heads. And we get into the boardroom or into the office or someplace, and we are telling ourselves, we have to stay quiet. We have to stay in the background. When in fact, we may have a great deal to offer. And if we can heal the wound associated with that old belief, then we can integrate it and kind of show up as a fully blown human being. That's not to say we're going to suddenly turn into loudmouths. It just means that we will overcome whatever beliefs we have and heal it and grow into a newer version of ourselves that is meant to be heard just as much as everybody else.
That's a powerful perspective. So maybe you can share your story or I'll share mine. So when we became aware, from having done the work in a men's group or with coaching or counseling, that we were attached to our limiting beliefs and stories or childhood wounds, how then can a person who is become aware that there's things that are really holding them back, that they're they're walking alongside their shadow, how can they begin to take some steps to lovingly or move into doing some initial work to get to know their shadows?
Yeah, that's a great question. And I think before we even get there, becoming aware of the shadow is a challenging process unto itself. And so I teach people a variety of things. First of all, what I think is trying to find a shadow is kind of like trying to find a subatomic particle. Now, if you know anything about quantum physics, you know that we hardly ever actually see the particle. But what we do see are, trails and stuff that show where the particle has been. And so we learn about the particle's behavior by virtue of those trails and various other things that we discover. So we can learn more and more about our shadows in the same way, because often, until we are completely aware of our shadow, by the way. Now, shadows are a little different in the sense that you actually can eventually see the shadow itself. But initially, you're only going to see outward expressions of its behavior. So, and so how do you see that? Well, there's a few ways. The most obvious is if you find yourself acting out in some way, really angrily acting out. Often it's because something has been triggered inside you and you're just reacting to protect yourself. You're not even necessarily aware of the fact that you're doing that. Once you maybe overcome the acting out part, now you're getting down a little bit deeper. You can allow the shadow to bubble up a little bit further. And maybe the way you see it is by recognizing your projections onto other people. And this is something that everybody does. You might see somebody and that person, squints their eyes or tilts their head or shakes their head or something that has some behavior that triggers a thought in your mind saying, oh my God, that person doesn't like me, or that person thinks I'm an idiot, or whatever. It may or may not be true, but the point is you're projecting your own belief system onto that person because of their behavior. And so we all do projection all the time. The question is, how aware are you of your projection? So if you can get to that level where you recognize, oh yeah, I'm projecting blah, 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 some old ancient story about my life, because my mom used to shake her head like that. And then it would be followed by some litany of verbal abuse, or maybe something else would happen. It depends on your story. All of us have our own whole history of stories that we've dealt with in our lives. And we see these people behaving in this way that reminds us of mom or dad or grandma or a teacher or somebody in our childhood who treated us in a way that we didn't like. and who then led us to believe that we had to behave in a certain way in order to accommodate their desires. That's ultimately what to do. So if you can recognize your projections, then you can begin to see, oh, that's probably a shadow part of me that's projecting something. Let's see if I can find out what that is. Now, at first, it's difficult, I think, to do it on your own. I think it's helpful if you have somebody else that you trust, somebody else who has no agenda, but who's willing to help you see this, a facilitator, a coach, somebody who's done this work before. If you can have that support, then you can start doing a little bit of a deeper dive and get down to the root cause of whatever it is you're projecting. By the way, when you do that, it doesn't mean you're going to suddenly one day stop projecting. That just doesn't happen, okay? And it doesn't mean that you're going to eliminate your shadows. You probably won't. What you can do, however, is just keep raising awareness. And the more you raise awareness, the more you become aware of other shadows that you hadn't really been paying attention to before. And so over time, you start to notice all these things. And pretty soon, if you do this with love in your heart and with a desire for compassion and forgiveness and healing, then what you can do is you can start to look at every new shadow as a wonderful adventure in discovery about who you really are. And that is the beauty of the process. Now, it's not going to happen overnight.
Yeah.
You know, it's taken me years to get to the place where I'm not shadow free at all. I don't expect ever I will be. But I'm at the point now where I kind of look forward to discovering new shadows. That's something that you can get to as well.
That's definitely a wonderful place to be in, where you're looking forward to discovering and opening new shadows. But yeah, initially, the work of being made aware of exhibiting behaviors or expressing yourself in a way that is not comfortable for you, that would be definitely the first step, is becoming aware that, wow, I'm not really comfortable with how I'm responding or reacting or behaving or acting when I'm placed in an event or situation or, projecting. So again, that awareness needs to be made by you first in order for you to even begin to do the work. We can be very unconscious about our shadow work. And one of the ways we initially do that is to blame others. Well, I'm this way because of what you did or didn't do. I do great. With a lot of blame. I know initially when you are walking parallel with your shadow, there's going to be a lot of victim. I'm the victim and I'm blaming others. So a lot of victim and blame posturing going on.
Right.
That's initially how, if we're meant to come to our shadows, something's going to implode with the victim and the blaming. It's not going to work anymore. There's going to be,
right.
I can't do.
I call it the BS game.
Yeah.
And BS stands for blame and shame.
Exactly.
Those are two ways that we try to protect ourselves from being hurt, by blaming someone else or shaming someone else into silence. And very good.
And that's very draining after having done that for quite some time. After a while, you wake up one day and are completely exhausted, drained, tired, because it hasn't worked. Unfortunately, living in the BS game, it takes you out of living richly and authentically in your voice, because you're so busy trying to defend taking a stance, defending your territory. And nobody ever needs, our shadows were never designed to keep us from living fully. I definitely believe, now that I've done the work with you, David, and on my own and continuing, that our shadows are a part, an aspect of us to get to know ourselves more fully and be comfortable with our supposed idiosyncrasies, our frailties, our woundedness, our biases, our really awesome stuff.
You mean all the things that make us unique?
Yes. Owning that. I mean, I know back in the day, I had those two different lives. Here's my public life. I can tell you about all these things, but don't even open that door. It's going to implode and spill out. It's so ugly and ugh.
Right,
So,
right.
But compassion, I believe, for me, or learning mindfulness and compassion was the beginning of my journey into not being so upset and crippled to take the lens and examine these things. Like, why do I keep reacting this way or defending this way, or, projecting? What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, it's really interesting to me. Why do I continue to behave in this manner? And it's a funny thing about shadow. Sometimes I may, and people who listen to me know that I speak a lot in I statements, and the reason I do that is I don't want to assume that everybody else experiences the same thing I do. So my experience is when I allow myself to become a victim, that's when I start to use the blame and shame game. I have also discovered that the only way to stop being a victim is to reclaim my own power. And the way I do that is by taking responsibility for every aspect of my life, every aspect. Even the things that you do to me, I take some responsibility because I was involved in that interaction in some way. So somehow I must have contributed to it. Now, how much did I contribute to the point where, was I pushing your buttons, deliberately trying to get you upset? Was my shadow activated in that way? Excuse me, I'm sorry. I have a bit of a froggy throat today. But you see what I'm getting at? It's a question of eventually raising my own awareness to a high enough level that I can recognize when I'm starting to slip into shadow, or I'm starting to slip into ego. And that just takes practice. That just takes practice. That's all it is. And practice is a really good word, because all of life is a practice. And you talk about a spiritual practice, you talk about a meditative practice, you talk about a yoga practice, you talk about a martial arts practice. That's what it is. It's a practice. So the implication is that you're never necessarily going to become a total expert or a master at it, but you can be on a path of mastery. And that's what life mastery to me is all about.
I like that. Shadow practice.
Exactly.
Rather than shadow avoidance, or how about reframing? That's another one. Reframing how we perceive the aspects of our life that were deemed not good, ugly, hidden. Reframing that as a means of growth, and it's an ongoing practice. What we step down into, we learn about one shadow and where it might have come from, and have opened it up. Okay, then another shadow pops up. But because we've begun to establish this practice of maybe looking at these aspects of ourselves with an eye of maybe being a detective or an open, non-judgmental observer, observing this, we can see them in a more truer, realistic light, rather than from a place that I used to see mine as, ooh, this is ugly and no one wants to know about this, even me. So I'm going to just shove it down aside, put it in the cave, or carry it with me behind me. But making a practice, and with each practice, you're going to become more comfortable and able to, as another shadow pops up from something that happens in another season, you won't become completely sideways. You'll be able to say, oh, okay, I've got some more work to do. Great, because that's going to bring me to living and being even more authentic and known to myself, and as I go about my life. So right. Understanding the signals the shadows give us that want to get us our attention, and then establishing a practice to do the work. Again, maybe that initially will be our own journey, but bringing alongside others, because we can't always see. I know I certainly can't always see the thing, I'm so used to it or blind to it, that it is really important, I think, at some point, to really bring in the company of others that can guide you.
Right.
Exactly.
a family like we have here at the Wellness Universe. Yeah.
Uh-huh.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Something you said, though, I wanted to just come back to. You talked about how you might go through this process of saying, oh, that part is so bad, I've got to hide it. I've got to hide it. This is precisely how the ego mind operates. That's precisely what it is doing. It is the ego that is telling you have to hide it. It is the ego that's saying you've got to protect yourself. You've got to stay safe. And the way to stay safe is to hide that part and just keep it hidden forever. Put it into that box, lock that box, and don't ever let it be seen again. That's what the ego mind does. Remember, its job is to keep you safe. So, not to make the ego wrong, that doesn't serve anything. So love the ego. Say, thank you so much for keeping me safe. I really appreciate it. And I hope you continue to do so for the rest of my life. And I've got this now. I'm old enough. I have reached a level of maturity now where I am going to bring my soul into play, and we are going to lovingly look into this box, and we are going to lovingly heal all those parts and bring them back into myself. That's what we're going to do, my soul and me. That's what we're going to do. Thank you for being there. Please continue with your warnings, and I will pay attention, but I'm not always going to do what you want me to do because my soul is actually in charge. This is something that it takes a little bit of work and some effort and maybe some growth to get to the place where you can say that to yourself. And then what happens is you can begin to approach every single one of your shadows and the ego mind itself, as a matter of fact, as a kind of a little child. A little child that maybe doesn't know exactly how to deal with something. But you, as an adult with a powerful soul that is filling you and guiding you, you can heal those children. You can embrace them, love them, and bring all kinds of forgiveness and compassion to them. And you can say things to this little child, which is really just an aspect of yourself. I know exactly what you're going through. And I totally understand how you feel. And I love you unconditionally, no matter what. And I'm going to do what I can to help you heal that wound. This is what you'd say to a child. And it's probably the only time you can actually say, truthfully, I know exactly what you're going through. Because you're talking to a young version of yourself.
Ooh, that's very powerful. I'm thinking of my own journey. That is so true. That as we were developing, our ego came alongside us to protect us initially and to keep us safe. And all of that younger years, if we don't do the work, it stays in that state as we were growing and developing.
Exactly.
And we unknowingly think that, oh, okay, this just is what it is. Okay. So we attach and believe to that. But that is a beautiful thing, that the ego, not to see it as an enemy or really, again, an uninvited guest, but its job was to keep us safe and protect us to a certain point. And then we have the job of unpacking and moving away, pushing aside from the protection of the ego, so to speak, and getting down into the heart of who we have now become from the child.
A friend of mine had a great metaphor for the ego and the way it seems to operate. As you said, the ego comes along when we're, I don't know how old we are when the ego first begins to show itself, 2 or 3 years old, something like that. But it is there to protect us and to guide us through through our journey through the physical world. But what happens is, because of all the training that we receive and how we're taught to trust our minds, think logically, make it linear, scientific, all this kind of stuff. This is how we're taught. It's pretty much entirely left brain thinking that we are taught. We're kind of told to forget about that whole spiritual God stuff because, that's all just airy-fairy bullshit. That's what we're told. And so consequently, we grow into this ego-based environment where, we're living our entire life trying to control things with the ego. It's like we're in a ship where the captain of the ship originally was the soul. But then this ego came and kind of mutinied, tossed the soul into the brig, and now has been running my life into chaos ever since. So we have to not get rid of the ego, but tame the ego and get it back under control and bring that captain out of the brig and back up onto the bridge where it belongs. So the soul really is the true master of our lives. Our soul being our spiritual connection to all that is. That is where the importance comes in. And if we can get to that place, then the ego can function as a kind of a co-pilot or a navigator rather than running the show, which it's not really qualified to do.
That's very well put, that our soul is our soul is at the essence of who we are. And through going through life by wanting to be protected by and saved by the ego, then all the shadow, the depths of that have set up shop so that we spend a good deal of our life thinking that the shadow is who we are and how we're to be. We sometimes navigate our lives from the withholding or scarcity that usually is found in the shadow when we've had that slant that way. But as we learn how to step in and look and observe these shadow areas, for me, anger seems to be, I must be angry right now. That's it. Anger or scarcity or feeling unheard, feelings of self-worth. If we begin to really look at those heavy things and get into the essence of them again with compassion and care, then we can dispel them, set them up as a means to help our growth. And that's where we find, again, we're working to find and really uncover the treasure, who we are in those shadows. It's not to say that, again, everything is, on a scale of 1 to 10, it's all a 10, but that we can see who we are. Oh, I know my assets, my attributes. I get my biases and my, whatever, that I hate to say the word frailties or whatever. I get that all parts make me whole versus just one or the other. One doesn't make me less than, one doesn't make me more than. When they come together, I get to be me in all times of life, not just when times are bad or when times are good. I get to completely stand as I am every day.
When I've worked with people on specific shadow work, I have a little technique I do called, it's essentially a kind of a voice dialogue technique where I have a conversation with the shadow part. And I do a little interview. And what I try and do is I try to get the shadow to tell me what it's attempting to accomplish in the context of the person I'm working with. And when I do this kind of interview process, inevitably I end up at the same level, where if I take it deep enough, and I'll say something like the shadow, I'll say to the shadow, what are you trying to get for let's say a Nancy here? What are you trying to get for Nancy? And the shadow might say, well, I'm trying to create a place where she can get heard, where people will hear what she has to say. And then I say, yeah, thank you. That's wonderful that you're trying to do that. And I'm curious, what do you get for yourself when Nancy gets heard? Now, this is now turning the tables on the shadow itself. And the shadow, who knows what the answer will be? The answer might be something like, well, I get to feel some sense of confidence for having guided Nancy in the right way. Great. And when you get that confidence, what do you really have for yourself that's even more important than that? And you just keep taking it deeper and deeper and deeper. And every time I do this, I usually get to one of 4 different root level things, but often it boils down to the shadow is just trying to create love. It's trying to give or receive love. That's what it's trying to do. It just may be doing it in a dysfunctional way. It may be doing it in a way that might have worked when Nancy was 3 or 4 years old, but doesn't work anymore when Nancy is, well, I know you're over 20 now, so I'll just say that, right? It doesn't work now, but it worked then. And so what I'm saying is, are you willing to release that to the shadow? Are you willing to release that strategy and allow Nancy to try something new so that she can get to be heard and you can still get to feel that love that you're trying to give or receive? Do you see how that works? It's powerful. And it really does require, a separate person. It can't be. I've tried doing it on myself. It's much more difficult. It's much easier if I have another person who can facilitate me through that process. Do you see? But anyway, it's a powerful way of beginning to understand. In my case, every shadow I've ever interviewed, it comes down to that same basic idea. It's always trying to find a way to give or receive love. That's what it's seeking. So think about that for a moment. Every shadow is trying to give or receive love for you. That's a pretty nice gift.
And that's very powerful.
Yeah,
that's
and it just kind of, it may be doing it in a way that doesn't really work, that actually causes chaos or whatever, but that's only because it learned this strategy at a very young age. That's all.
The shadow took its direction from the ego that was trying to save and protect us. The shadow, along with the ego, reframe it. It's not based on scarcity or shame or guilt that we have perceived, using the victim and blame. But the shadow, if we know, and we're saying it today, which I love that, I'm going to reflect on that, is really wanting to give us love and allow us to receive love. And it used a dysfunctional means of doing it through misguidedness going forward with the ego. But if we understand that the essence of our shadow parts is really love, wow, okay, we've all been healed today. Great.
Well, speaking of which, I'd like to just kind of open it up.
Yes.
The people who are watching have been pretty quiet. I think they're just listening to what we're saying. But I'm wondering if any of you have questions or comments that you'd like to share before, because we're coming up close to the end of our show here, and I want to make sure that we open up the floor for a little bit. So if you have questions or comments, please just type them into the chat area, and we will do our best to respond to those. Yeah, so it's a pretty interesting journey for sure. This idea of doing shadow work or shadow dance or shadow. What was the word you used? I can't remember. Shadow. I can't remember the phrase you used. It was a good one. I liked it.
Signaling.
Well, signaling was one, but you talked about. It doesn't matter. It's all about finding, accepting, loving, and healing the shadow. Because the more we can do that, the more we integrate ourselves and create ourselves into the full, holistic, complete, whole human being that we were meant to be.
And that's the treasure. So going back to finding the treasure in your shadow, the treasure in your shadow is the essence of self-love, of kindness, of patience, of love that allows all of us to see past what we initially see external and move into the deeper level of what that means and how we can apply it and use it going forward with ourselves and with others. So that would be definitely my takeaway, which is having a different perspective and relationship with your shadow, instead of seeing it as something to hide from or to be embarrassed by, or it carries a lot of negativity. Reframe your perspective that your shadow is you. We are here really wanting to get love, give love, and seeing it from that perspective really opens things up so much more in a deeper level.
Yeah. Well, I see Anna posted a comment there. Love the conversation and what great inspiration, and so flowing with you both. Thank you, Anna. I appreciate that. It's nice to hear that.
Thank you.
One of the things that we've been saying, and that about this whole notion of shadow and why our tendency to avoid it and so forth. If you can remember that every action, every motivation is rooted at its deepest level by a desire to give or receive love. If you can understand that and accept it as true. Now remember, it doesn't mean that it's always going to show up as love in the way that you and I might understand it. Think about, occasionally we see, and this is a kind of a sad case, but we see parents who discipline their children in a way that many people would view as abusive, but the parents themselves might view as, I'm just trying to love my kids. And that might be true for them. It's dysfunctional and they need to learn to correct the dysfunction. But the fact of the matter remains that they're still motivated by this desire, this deep, deep, deep desire to give or receive love. Whether it's to receive it for themselves or to give it to their children, I mean, it's just something for us to be aware of. And if you can see things that way, I think it's easier to stay in a place of empathy and compassion, even when you see something that really requires an angry response. You can still be compassionate and empathetic while letting your anger move you to the right kind of action to correct something that's been, an injustice of some kind.
Yes. And that is the gift of learning how to make friends with your shadow and see things in a truer, beautiful light, is to take off the lens that it's poor me into, wow, I get where this is coming from because I understand myself so much better. So we can, again, what we do unto ourselves is our ability to handle things that come through us and to us from, our day-to-day life in society. So, yeah. Yes. And we've got a comment from Barbara. Oh,
a question. Yeah, go ahead.
But Barbara says, yeah, wouldn't experience under habit keep most people unaware that shadow behaviors exist? I would say that, yeah, and it definitely initially, if you are going through the motions, you are going to be, initially unaware. But I think as David and I have shared, that there comes a time when you are literally up against your own self. If you are engaging in the same thought behavior pattern or the same physical, there's going to come a time when you're realizing that, wow, I'm not getting anywhere with this. Same old is going on. And that would be the intersection where you could continue on, of course, or look to bring other ways to answer the question, is this it? What can be next? So it does involve the person in that to begin to look for other ways of being and understanding and knowing. What about you, David? I know we're about the end.
Well, I agree with basically with what you said, but I have a slightly different perspective on this. My interpretation is, I believe that every single one of us is aware that shadow exists, even when we are not aware of our own shadow. This is the way I see it happening. We can often see shadow showing up in somebody else. We're good at that. We're very good at that. But we're a little more reluctant to acknowledge and admit the shadow within ourselves. And that's part of the problem, I think. So and that, by the way, I think is the most pernicious shadow of all. That is, I can see your shadow, but I have no shadow. That's the biggest and most pernicious shadow of all. So keep that in mind. And but ultimately, I believe you're right on the one sense that shadow, by definition, is largely unconscious. It is, if you think, Carl Jung actually claimed that the entire unconscious is all shadow. I have a slightly different perspective on that because many people think of shadow as a bad thing. And in fact, it's not necessary, as we've been just talking about today, it's not necessarily a bad thing at all. So keep that in mind too. To Thomas just said, thank you for acknowledging something I learned about myself and have now mostly healed. I used always be late for many things. My mother told me finally that she tried to hold me back so I would be born on her birthday 2 days later. Oh, interesting.
Mm-hmm.
Anyone else I've mentioned that to has said that's not possible. Great discussion. Well, my friend Thomas, I will tell you this. My mother claimed my sister was due to be born on February 29th, and labor started late on February 28th. My mother claimed that it was her willpower alone that delayed that birth until March 1st. So it may well be possible to hold off on labor. I don't know. I've never been a mother, so I can't say for sure. But my mother claimed that was the case. And yeah, it's possible that that would have had an effect on you. Whether she succeeded in doing it or not is irrelevant. The fact that she had the intention of holding you back while you were being born will have an effect on you. So yes, there may be some shadow that's born out of that experience. And, there are people who can help you do, early life regression to find out more about that and to see what the actual impact was for you. But thank you for sharing that. I honor you for being willing to share that here.
And thank you, Barbara, as well. Looks like our time is up. This has been an incredible conversation and learning journey for myself, as always, and such an honor to be here with all of you today who have come on to listen. I hope that each of you have some incredible takeaways that you're going to ruminate on and honor yourself as you go through today and this week.
Yeah. So I would just like to remind you all, thank you all for being here, first of all, and thank you for sharing your experiences and for asking questions and for participating. That always makes the conversation much more interesting, and who knows where these things are going to go. But thank you so much for your input. I would like to remind you that this recording will go up on my website at yourlifemasterycoach.com, so you can watch it there if you want to. Send your friends there to check it out. And also, after the recording is complete and we go off the air, Learn It Live will send you an email requesting that you provide some feedback about this course. It would be awesome if you could just do a review for us and, give us a 4 or 5 star review or something, because that really helps us to spread the word. Oh, thank you, Anna. She says 5 stars. I appreciate that.
And if you're not a member of Wellness Universe, I strongly encourage each of you to take a look. Go to the wellnessuniverse.com. They're also, you can find it on Find Wellness Universe, Facebook and LinkedIn and Instagram. It is a beautiful universe that gathers all of us together who are on our journey of healthy well-being, whether you are a healer, a coach, a provider, or just somebody interested. I strongly encourage you to get to know the Wellness Universe and to join. It has been the best thing I've ever done in my life for my journey here. So do so.
That's great.
Yeah.
Yes. And when you get there, don't forget to connect with both of us on the, our links are in the chat there. So you can just click through and connect with us there. Anyway, thank you, Nancy, for another great conversation. It's just been a great pleasure, and as always. And I guess we'll be together again on May 11th, I think it is, the second Tuesday of May.
I believe so. Yep. Sounds good.
All right, everybody.
Next time. Thank you. Bye. It's been wonderful.
Bye-bye.